You know, we don't do family dinners with you anymore. That's what my son said when I called to wish him a happy birthday. Not hello, not a pause, just that sentence, flat and certain, like a stamp on an envelope already sealed. I stood in the kitchen, the kettle just beginning to whistle behind me, and I couldn't move. 63 years I've been breathing on this earth, and in that moment, I wasn't sure I remembered how. 41 of those years I'd been his mother. I'd held him in a hospital in Winnipeg during the worst blizzard of 1983, wrapped in a flannel blanket my own mother had sewn. And now he was telling me there was no room for me at his table. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just said, "All right, Daniel," and hung up. I turned off the kettle, sat down at the kitchen table, the same oak one I'd had since the house on Elmwood Crescent. The one Daniel carved his initials into when he was 9 because he thought I wouldn't notice. I noticed. I always noticed everything about him. The way he held his fork, the way he laughed too loud when he was nervous, the way he still called me Mom even when his voice had gone cool and distant, the way all sons do when someone else becomes the center of their world. I stared at the initials for a long time. D, H, rough, crooked, proud. I made tea I didn't drink and sat with the silence until it stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like something else. Something I couldn't name yet. Daniel is my only child. His father, Robert, passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless, the way that disease always is. After Robert died, I thought Daniel and I would grow closer. I thought grief might do what years of busyness had slowly undone. Instead, Vanessa happened. Not that she caused everything. That would be too simple. But she made certain things easier to ignore and certain things easier to justify. The calls started getting shorter. The visits stopped being visits and started being requests. "Mom, could you watch the kids Saturday? We have something on." "Mom, the furnace needs replacing. Could you help us out this month?" "Mom, we're looking at a bigger place in Oakville, and the down payment is just a little short." I always said yes, every time. Not because I was foolish, not because I didn't see it clearly, but because I believed love was something you demonstrated. I thought if I stayed useful, stayed available, stayed generous, they would remember who I was to them. I kept a notebook, not to track debts. I never expected repayment. I kept it so I wouldn't disappear entirely, so some part of me could say, I was here, I gave this. I mattered. The numbers added up quietly over the years. Help with the minivan when it broke down, $4,000. A loan when Daniel lost his contracting work during a slow winter, $6,000. Money toward their older daughter's hockey gear and tournament fees, nearly $2,000 over 3 seasons. The refrigerator they needed after the move, $1,400, and the largest, the one that still sits in my chest like a stone, $22,000 toward the down payment on their house in Oakville. My RRSP, cashed out early, the penalties I paid myself without a word. Total, more than $37,000 over 11 years. Not one thank you card. Not one mention of it again. Just, "You're the best, Mom," and an emoji. And silence until the next time something broke. I used to tell myself that's just how it goes with adult children. That the distance was normal. That the forgetting was ordinary. Robert would have told me otherwise. He always had a quiet way of seeing the truth before I could admit it to myself. He used to say, "Maggie, you give so much of yourself, there's going to be nothing left for the people who actually show up." I'd wave him off. He'd shake his head. He was never wrong, that man. The night after Daniel's call, I didn't sleep. I lay in the bedroom we'd shared, on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling. The room still smelled faintly like him, like Robert, or maybe I'd just convinced myself it did. I thought about the last time I'd been included in something real. A birthday dinner, a Sunday meal, anything. 3 Christmases ago. That was the last time. The year after that, they went to Vanessa's parents in Burlington. The year after that, something came up. This past year, They didn't call until December 28th. I got up at 5 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. I wasn't angry. Or maybe I was, but it wasn't the loud kind. It was the quiet kind, the kind that lives low in your chest and doesn't shout, just waits. And in that waiting, I made a decision. The bank opened at 9:30. I was there at 9:25, standing outside in my wool coat, watching a woman in scrubs rush past with a coffee in each hand. I used to be that woman. 31 years as an RN at the Health Sciences Center, then later at a smaller clinic in Mississauga. I knew how to work, I knew how to show up, and I knew how to keep going when the situation was difficult. I hadn't forgotten any of that. The branch manager, a young man named Kevin who I recognized from the neighborhood, greeted me with a careful smile. He knew me as a regular. I asked to have the pre-authorized transfers to Daniel's account suspended immediately. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Are you sure, Mrs. Henderson?" "There are 3 scheduled this month." "I'm sure," I said. "Cancel all of them and add a secondary password to my accounts." He nodded and did exactly that. When it was done, I thanked him and left with a printed confirmation and the strange sensation of having exhaled after holding my breath for 11 years. The call came that evening. Not Daniel, Vanessa. She didn't waste time on small talk. She never did. "Hey, so the auto deposit didn't come through today?" I waited to see if she'd frame it as a question. She didn't. "Oh," she said, finally. "Is everything okay with the account?" "Everything is fine," I said. "I've canceled the transfers." A long pause. "Why?" "Because I've decided to stop funding an adult household that doesn't consider me family." Another pause, this one harder. "Is this about Daniel's birthday?" "It's about a pattern," I said. "A long, consistent pattern." She laughed, not warmly. "Okay, you're being dramatic. We appreciate everything you do. You know that." "You appreciate the money," I said. "That's not the same thing." I could hear her composing herself on the other end. "This is really not a good time for this. Things are tight right now." "They've been tight for 11 years, I said, "and yet somehow that was always my problem to solve." "Not anymore." She said something else, something about perspective and family and me making things harder than they needed to be. I waited until she finished. Then I said, "Good night, Vanessa," and I put the phone down. I stood by the kitchen window and watched the streetlights flicker on along the road. A neighbor was walking her dog, a big golden retriever that she always let off-leash on quiet evenings. Normal life, continuing right outside my window, unbothered by what had just happened inside it. I pulled down the filing box from the top shelf of the hall closet the next morning. The one with the green lid that I'd labeled house and legal in black marker. I hadn't opened it since the year after Robert passed, when I'd updated the beneficiary forms and double-checked the mortgage was clear. Inside, the deed to the house, Robert's will, my own will, last updated 7 years ago. A handwritten list of accounts and passwords Robert had made for me before he got too sick to write steadily. I looked at the will for a long time. Daniel was the sole beneficiary. The house, the accounts, everything. I closed the folder, picked up the phone, and called Patricia Newell. Patricia is a family solicitor in Mississauga who'd helped Robert and me set up our estate planning years ago. She's calm, precise, and does not suffer nonsense quietly. When I explained what I wanted, she didn't ask me if I was sure. She didn't suggest I sleep on it or talk to someone first. She just said, "Come in, Thursday morning. I'll have a draft ready." I slept better that night than I had in months. Thursday, I wore my good gray blazer and took the GO train into the city. Patricia's office smelled like coffee and old paper, which I've always found reassuring. We sat across from each other for 90 minutes. I told her about the money. I told her about the birthday call. I told her about the years of slow disappearing, the shrinking of my place in their lives until I existed only as a resource, not a person. She listened without interrupting. "What I want," I told her, is to ensure that while I'm alive, no one can pressure me about this property. And when I'm gone, I'd like to revise who receives what." She nodded. "We can set up a life estate so you retain full control of the house. We can also name a new primary beneficiary for your registered accounts and set single authorization access only. Who would you like to name?" I thought about that for a moment. "My granddaughter, Lily, Daniel's older daughter, 14 years old, all quiet attention and enormous heart. She'd called me on my birthday in October and spent 40 minutes asking about Robert's garden, wanting to know what he grew, how he did it, whether I still kept it up. She'd sent me a card at Christmas with a pressed leaf inside and a note that said, 'I love you, Grandma,' with a drawing of our kitchen table. I'd kept it on the refrigerator since. Lily gets the house," I told Patricia, "and I'd like a letter on file that simply states that I was not incapacitated when these decisions were made. That I was entirely clear." She didn't blink. "Consider it done." When I walked out into the afternoon, the air was cold and clean the way it gets in March in Ontario, that particular brightness that promises something without quite delivering it yet. I stopped at a bakery on the way to the station and bought a butter tart, the real kind, not too sweet, the pastry just crumbling right. I sat on a bench outside and ate it slowly and didn't think about anything in particular. It's a small thing, a butter tart on a bench, but it was entirely mine. Daniel called 3 days later. I'd been expecting it. His voice had the controlled quality people use when they're furious but want to seem reasonable. He'd spoken to Patricia's office. He'd called the bank. He wasn't shouting, but he was very close to it underneath the surface. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you doing this?" I was folding laundry at the kitchen table. "I kept folding. I would have thought that was clear," I said. "You changed the will without even talking to me. Without any warning. I didn't realize I needed your permission for my own affairs." He exhaled sharply. "That's not what I said." "You've been telling me how to manage my affairs for years," I said, in smaller ways, suggesting I sell the house, that a condo would be more practical, that the RRSP should be used strategically. "You meant for your benefit, not mine." A long pause. "That's not fair." "What isn't fair," I said, still folding, "is that you called me on your birthday to tell me I'm no longer part of your family celebrations. That's what started this, Daniel, not the money. The birthday call. I was having a bad day." "You've been having a bad day for 3 years." He was quiet. I finished folding a sweater and set it on the pile. "You've been cut out of the will," he said, "and you froze all the transfers. You're punishing us." "No," I said quietly. "I'm protecting myself. Those are different things. This isn't like you." "Maybe it is," I said. "Maybe you just never noticed, because I always went along with things." He said something about how Vanessa was upset, how the kids were confused, how I was making everything harder. I let him finish. Then I said, "Daniel, I love you. I will always love you. But I am no longer your fallback plan. I'm a person, and I'd like to be treated like one before I stop being around at all." He didn't slam anything. He just went quiet, and then he hung up. I put my hand flat on the folded pile of laundry and breathed. I did not cry. That surprised me every time. The knock on the door 2 days later was softer than I'd expected. When I opened it, Lily was standing on the porch in her school coat, her backpack still on, her face uncertain. She was taller than I remembered. They always are. "Grandma," she said, "can I come in?" "Always," I said. She sat at the kitchen table and I made hot chocolate, the old way, stovetop with milk, the way she'd liked since she was small. She wrapped her hands around the mug and didn't say anything right away. I let her take her time. "Dad's really upset," she finally said. "I imagine he is. He says you cut him off." "I made some changes to my finances," I said. "Yes." She looked into her mug. "He says you're angry." "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm done waiting to be included." She was quiet again. Then she said, "I don't think they treat you right." Her voice was very small and very certain at the same time. I looked at her. "Honey, You don't have to say that. I know I don't. She looked up. But I've seen it. The way Mom talks about coming here like it's an errand. The way Dad only calls when something's wrong. I'm not stupid. No, I said. You're one of the least stupid people I know. She almost smiled. I actually think about it sometimes, about how you always remember everything. My games, my marks, what I'm reading. You remembered I'd switched to French immersion and asked me how it was going. Mom forgot I was even in it. I put my hand over hers. I just want you to know, she said, very carefully, that I'm not like them. I don't want to be. I know, sweetheart. She visited for almost 2 hours. We talked about her science project, about Robert's garden, about a book she'd been reading for English class. When she put her coat back on to leave, she hugged me at the door for a long time, the way children do when they mean it. After she was gone, the house felt less hollow than it had in weeks. Vanessa came by the following Tuesday. She didn't call ahead. I watched her car pull up from the window, and I didn't rush to the door. She knocked 3 times, evenly spaced, the way someone knocks when they've rehearsed it. I opened the door and stepped aside. She came in without taking off her boots. She stood near the entrance to the kitchen, arms crossed, the way people stand when they want to look composed, but actually need the physical structure of crossed arms to hold themselves together. I want to be honest with you, she said. We're in a difficult position right now, financially. Daniel's work has slowed down, and we've got expenses coming up this spring. I understand, I said. So this isn't a great time for you to be making decisions that affect all of us. My decisions don't affect all of you, I said calmly. They affect my accounts and my property, which are mine. Her jaw tightened. You know what I mean. I do know what you mean, I said. You mean that you've built a certain expectation into your budget, that my contributions were counted on, and now that they're gone, there's a gap. That gap is not my responsibility. You've been part of our lives for 15 years. I've been part of your finances, I said. That's not the same thing. Her eyes moved around the kitchen, the way people look around a room when they're searching for a different argument. She looked at the table, the window, the old photo of Robert and me by the lake in Muskoka that I keep on the counter. You're being selfish, she said finally. I've been selfless for 15 years, I said. Maybe it's time. She turned toward the door. I hope you understand what you're doing to this family. I understand it better than you might think, I said. She left without another word. The door closed behind her, and I stood in the kitchen and listened to the quiet. I made myself dinner, soup from scratch, the way my mother used to make, with whatever vegetables were in the crisper and a good broth and bread from the bakery down the street. I ate slowly. I watched the last of the light go out the back window. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be clear about that. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt tired and sad and strangely light, like something had been set down that I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten the weight was optional. My friend Carol called that weekend. We've known each other since our nursing days, and she has always been honest with me in the way that only old friends can be, where the honesty doesn't come from cruelty but from knowing someone too well to bother softening things unnecessarily. She drove up from Hamilton on Saturday with a bag of groceries and her reading glasses on her head, the way she always forgets them. She walked in, looked at me, and said, "You finally did it." I made coffee and we sat at the table for 3 hours. I told her everything. The bank, the solicitor, Vanessa's visit, Daniel's call, Lily at the door. She listened and nodded and didn't tell me I should have done it sooner, which I appreciated. She just said, "I always knew you had it in you. I just didn't know when it was going to arrive." We talked about Robert, about how he would have handled it. She thought he'd have been firmer sooner. I thought he'd have tried to make Daniel understand first. We agreed he would have supported whatever I decided. Before she left, she said something that has stayed with me. She said, "The hardest thing isn't saying no. The hardest thing is forgiving yourself for all the years you said yes when you shouldn't have. Give yourself time for that part." I hugged her at the door and watched her car back out of the driveway. The maple in the front yard was just beginning to think about budding, those tiny, tight fists of green just barely visible at the tips of the branches. I went back inside and sat with that for a while. The following week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center on Dundas. I'd always meant to try it. Robert used to paint small landscapes, nothing serious, just something he did on Saturday mornings before the day filled up. He'd left his supplies in the hall closet. I'd looked at them every time I reached past them for the filing box. The class was on Wednesday evenings, 6 people around a long table with cheap plastic cups of water and good brushes, and nothing expected. The instructor was a woman about my age named Sandra, with paint under her fingernails and a very calming voice. She told us the first rule was that there were no mistakes, only decisions. I painted a maple tree. It didn't look much like a maple tree. Sandra told me it had good energy. I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. I signed up for the full 8-session series. On a Thursday evening, nearly 3 weeks after the birthday call, Daniel came by unannounced. I heard his car before I saw it, the particular sound of the engine he'd been meaning to get looked at for 2 years. He knocked twice. I took my time. When I opened the door, he looked thinner than I remembered, or maybe just tired. He had Robert's eyes. Daniel always did. That particular shade of gray-green that shifts depending on the light. Right now they were somewhere between sorry and defensive, which I recognized as his most honest expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Come in." He sat at the kitchen table in the same chair he'd always chosen, since childhood, closest to the window. Old habits stay in the body long after everything else shifts. I sat across from him and waited. He looked at the initials in the table, D.H. He hadn't noticed them in years, or at least hadn't mentioned them. Now his eyes rested there for a moment. "I know things have been wrong," he said. I didn't answer that. "I don't know when it happened," he said, "or how. But I know I stopped showing up as a son." He was quiet. I let the silence work. "Vanessa and I aren't in a great place," he said. "We haven't been for a while, and I think I let a lot of things slide that I shouldn't have, including you." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. He looked up. "I'm not saying this because of the will." "I know," I said. "And I meant it. I know my son well enough to know when he's performing and when he isn't. This wasn't a performance. I used you, Mom. I don't think I meant to. I think it just happened gradually, and you never said no, and I never thought about why." "I never said no because I thought it would keep us close," I said. "I was wrong about that." He nodded slowly. He put his hands flat on the table, the way Robert used to do when he was trying to be careful about something. "I'm not asking you to change anything," he said. "With the will, with the accounts, that's yours. I just wanted to come and say, I'm sorry." We sat together for a long time after that. Not comfortable exactly, but honest. We talked about Robert. We talked about when Daniel was young, the trips we used to take to the Lake District in summer, the way he and Robert would fish together in the early mornings while I slept in the tent, because I have never seen the appeal of fishing before 7 in the morning. He smiled at that. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Is Lily really getting the house?" "Yes," I said. He nodded. "She'd take care of it." "I know she would," I said. "That's why." He nodded again, a different kind of nodding, the kind that means something has landed and settled. He didn't hug me at the door, but he stayed a moment longer than he needed to. That meant something too. Lily came back the following Saturday morning with her sketchbook and a bag of bagels from the place in the Lakeshore Strip that we both liked. She spread cream cheese too thick, the way teenagers do, and we sat at the table while she showed me what she'd been drawing. Mostly birds, surprisingly detailed, done in pencil, with careful attention to the feathers. She told me about a teacher at school she admired, a woman who'd taught herself 3 languages in her 40s and talked about it openly, without self-congratulation, like it was simply something she'd chosen to do. She told me she wanted to be someone who chose things like that, deliberate things. things on purpose. I watched her talk and thought, here is someone who will be fine. Whatever her parents work out or don't work out, this one will be fine. After breakfast, we walked around the neighborhood. Slow because I'd been having some trouble with my knee, and she adjusted her pace without being asked. Without making it a thing, we stopped to look at someone's early crocuses coming up along a front path. Purple, insistent, small. I don't think you should be alone, she said suddenly. I looked at her. Not like alone, she said. I just mean, I think you should have people around more. People who actually want to be around. You're around, I said. She scrunched her nose. I'm 14, Grandma. I'm not a social life. You might be surprised. She linked her arm through mine for the walk back, which she hadn't done since she was small. I didn't mention it. I just walked, the cold still in the air, the crocuses behind us, the house coming into view down the street. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the watercolor set. I wasn't trying to paint anything in particular. I just moved color around on the paper, wet on wet, watching it spread and bleed and blur at the edges. There's something peaceful about watching things spread when you're not trying to contain them. I thought about Robert's note in the garden gloves, the one I'd found tucked into a jacket pocket last autumn, a short line written on the back of a grocery receipt. Don't let anyone convince you that small is the right size for you. He'd slipped it into my coat pocket during a hard stretch years ago, when Daniel had been going through a difficult period and I'd been folding myself smaller and smaller to keep the peace. I'd found it in the spring when I switched coats back, and I'd kept it in my wallet ever since. I took it out now and smoothed it on the table. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that making myself smaller was a kind of love, that being available without limit, without boundary, without rest, was what good mothers did, what good women did. Nobody told me that. I arrived at it on my own, through some accumulation of watching and absorbing and deciding. It took me a long time to understand that a person can give endlessly and still run empty. That generosity without self is not generosity. It's slow disappearance. I wasn't disappearing anymore. I put the note back in my wallet. I rinsed my brushes and set them to dry. I looked around the kitchen, the table with its initials, the window with the maple coming back to life outside, the refrigerator, with Lily's Christmas card, still held up by a magnet from a Niagara Falls trip we'd taken when she was 6. This house knows me, 34 years of knowing. The chip in the baseboard by the back door, where Daniel crashed his bike into the wall and we laughed for 20 minutes. The window latch in the spare room that sticks in cold weather and always has. The sound the third stair makes in the morning. A small creak, like a greeting. I belonged here. I had always belonged here. My daughter-in-law sent a message the following week. 2 sentences. I think we both said things we didn't mean. I hope we can find a way through this for the family's sake. I read it twice. No apology, exactly. No acknowledgement of what she'd said or done. Just a gesture toward normalcy, toward the status quo resuming, toward things going back to the way they were, which of course was the one thing I had no intention of allowing. I didn't respond that day. I went to my watercolor class instead. Sandra had us working on reflections. The same object, and its wavering echo on the water beneath it. The trick, she said, is that the reflection is never exactly the same. It's the same thing, but changed by the medium it's moving through. I thought about that on the bus home. I am the same person I was 11 years ago, or 20, or 40, but I've moved through enough now to be changed by it, shaped differently, reflecting differently. That's not a loss. That's what surviving looks like. I wrote back to Vanessa that evening. Just one line. I hope so too. But some things have changed, and that part is permanent. She didn't write back. That was fine. Carol called on a Sunday. She'd heard from a mutual friend that a local walking group was meeting Tuesday mornings at the waterfront. Older women mostly, some of them widowed, all of them interested in fresh air and conversation. Was I interested? I said yes before she'd finished asking. We walked for an hour and a half along the lakefront path, the water gray and restless on our right, the city skyline behind us. There were 7 of us, a retired teacher, a former pharmacist, a woman who'd run her own accounting firm for 20 years and sold it when she was 62. We talked about everything and nothing. A documentary someone had watched, a restaurant that had just opened on the lakeshore, a book one of them had read twice. Nobody asked me about my son. Nobody needed anything from me. We just walked and talked and breathed the cold lake air. And by the time we stopped for coffee at the little cafe near the pier, I felt lighter than I had in longer than I could remember. I am building something, I realized. Not rebuilding, building. New and deliberate and mine. That evening, I sat by the window and wrote a letter. I addressed it to Daniel, not my son, because what I wanted to say needed to come from one person to another, not through the fog of obligation and expectation that word had collected over the years. I didn't write it out of anger or grief. I wrote it out of clarity. I told him that I loved him without condition and always would. I told him that love was not the same as being available for use. I told him that the money was never the point. The birthdays were never the point. The point was whether I existed in his life as a person or only as a function. I told him that I'd spent too many years performing the second role and had decided to retire from it. I told him that the door to a real relationship was not closed, but it had a different shape now. It required showing up, actual showing up. Not only when the account was low or the calendar had an emergency. I signed it with my name, just Margaret, not Mom. I sealed it, but didn't send it. Not yet, maybe not ever. Some letters are written to be understood, not received. Lily called that night to tell me she'd gotten into the summer science enrichment program she'd applied to. She'd been nervous about the application for weeks and hadn't told her parents because she didn't want to jinx it. She'd told me, though, 3 weeks ago, sitting at this same kitchen table, she'd shown me the form she was filling out and asked me if her personal essay made sense. It made more than sense, I'd told her. It made her sound like herself. She called me first with the news. Before her parents, before her friends, she called me first. I congratulated her. I told her I'd known she'd get in. I told her I was proud of her, not in the way that adults say it to children as a reflex, but in the real way, the way that means I see who you are becoming and it is something worth seeing. After she hung up, I sat very still for a moment. Then I put on my good coat, the dark blue one, and walked down to the bakery before it closed. I bought a butter tart and a coffee and sat at the little table by the window and watched people pass outside. A couple walking a dog, 2 teenagers on bikes, an older man with a scarf the color of autumn leaves moving slowly but steadily, going somewhere, no hurry, no urgency, just moving through the evening at exactly his own pace. I thought about what it had cost me to get here. The years, the money, the silence I kept out of love that turned out to be fear, the shrinking, the waiting, the long, patient accommodation of people who had stopped accommodating me in return. And I thought about what I had now. This table, this coat, this coffee, the watercolor class on Wednesday evenings, Carol's voice on the phone on Sunday mornings, Lily calling me first with her good news, the walking group on Tuesdays along the lake, the maple in the front yard coming back, the house that knows me, the letter I wrote and didn't need to send because I already knew what I wanted to say. I am not lonely. I want to be clear about that. I am alone in the way that people are alone when they have finally stopped running from their own company. There is a difference. I had not felt it this clearly in years. I finished my coffee. I walked home through the evening, the air cold and clean, the streetlights making circles of gold on the pavement. I let myself in. I hung up my coat. I put the kettle on. The house was quiet and entirely mine. If something in this story caught you somewhere deep, somewhere you recognize but rarely name, I want you to know that you are not alone. Whatever you've given, whatever you've swallowed, whatever table you've been quietly removed from while still funding the dinner, that's not a small thing. It doesn't have to keep being your normal. You're allowed to come back to yourself. You always were. If this reached you, share it. Leave a comment. Let someone else know they're not the only one.